In this video, I'm going to make a terrarium with a working stream that flows down into a mini relaxing pond. Let's get straight into the build. I'm going to start right at the beginning by building the glass tank. Now you might think that building the glass tank is going to be really complex and difficult, but trust me when I say it's not. What I've got here is some frameless glass picture frames, and this is what I'll be using to build the tank. They're cheap to get hold of and really quite easy to cut. The thickness of the glass is just over 2mm. Some picture frames come with 1mm glass. Try and steer clear of these as it's really quite thin and hard to work with. Now I'm going to save myself some work and use the largest piece as the back panel without cutting it whatsoever. To cut the other pieces, here's what you're going to need. Firstly, you're going to need a ruler. What I like to do is place on a few patches of sticky tack to the underside and squish it down so it's pretty much flat. This really gives the ruler some traction and stops it from moving around when cutting the glass, so you get nice straight cuts. You'll also need a marker pen and obviously a glass cutter. When I first heard about cutting glass, I always thought you would need some big machines to do it properly, but that's not the case. Simple tools like these is all you need. I'll do my best to leave links to all the tools and materials that I'll be using for this build in the description. To start off, I'm marking the glass to the size I want to cut it. Now I'm lining the ruler up and making sure it's as straight as possible. With the glass cutter, I'm firmly pushing down into the glass and pulling it back in one continuous movement. It's important that you don't go over the cut more than once, as this will blunten the tip of the glass cutter. Now as you can see, there's a nice straight score going down the glass. All I'm going to do now is take it to a straight edge and give it a few gentle taps along this straight line. It breaks in half with ease and I'm left with a perfect straight cut. I will be sanding the glass later, but it's important to be careful at this point as it is really quite sharp. I know a lot of people are worried about cutting glass and it can seem quite intimidating. Believe me, you'll be surprised and it's much easier than you might think. Get hold of some picture frames and start practicing. You'll certainly screw up, as do I, but you'll get there in no time. If you don't like the thought of breaking the glass by hitting it on a straight edge, here's an easy alternative. Take a straight wooden skewer and place it under the score line. All you've got to do then is hold one side down whilst gently pressing the other. It snaps in half with ease. This here is the panel for the top of the tank. I'm going to cut off a small section of the corner. This will allow a USB cord from a pump to be fed through. I used the ruler as leverage to get a nice clean break. Before going any further, what I like to do is a quick test fit of all the pieces. In the past, I've cut all the pieces out, spent a lot of time sanding them down, only to find out that I've made a mistake. Obviously the glass is sharp, so it's got to be assembled with care. A good tip is to use electrical tape, as it doesn't leave any residue on the glass like some other tapes will. All the pieces fit together perfectly, so it's time to get to work sanding. As I'm using picture frame glass for this build, the only edges that need to be sanded are the ones that I cut. The factory edges from the frames are already really smooth. This is really handy, as on most pieces I only need to sand one out of the 4 sides. When sanding glass, make sure that the sandpaper is wet. This stops any glass dust, which is something you definitely don't want to be breathing in. With all the pieces sanded and dried, it's time to start assembling. I'm using some clear aquarium grade silicone. When it comes to the thickness of the silicone bead, it should be no thinner than the thickness of the glass. I like to make it a little bit thicker just to be safe. As you can see, I've already got all the electrical tape ready to lock everything in place. With the back and side panels in, I'm going to add a secondary bead of silicone on the inner seam of the glass. I'm then using my finger to smoothen it out and remove the excess. Adding this secondary bead really helps ensure that there's no leaks. 24 hours have passed and the silicone is fully cured. Before cleaning up the imperfections, I'm firstly going to add the hinged front door. I'm going to show you how to make a strong, seamless joint that allows the door to hinge open at the front. To start off, I'm placing some electrical tape on either side to make sure the door stays in place. Now I'm going to place on 2 strips of masking tape. The first strip is going along the front, flush with the top of the door. The second strip is going along the top of the tank with a small gap being left. It's very important to leave the small gap, as without it the hinge door won't work. There should be the top of the door visible and a portion of the top panel glass visible. Now I'm applying a small bead of silicone along the gap. Next, with my finger, I'm gently spreading out the silicone to make sure that it's in contact with all the glass. It's important not to press down too hard, as you don't really want to be taking much of the silicone off. What I like to do next is take a straight edge like this ruler and gently smoothen out the silicone. Once again, you don't want to be scraping it off, but instead just gently gliding the ruler over the top. This really does make it look much more professional. Now the last thing to do is to take the masking tape off whilst the silicone is still wet. With the tape out the way, you can now see that there is some thickness to the silicone, which is why it's so strong. 24 hours have passed, so now it's time to remove the tape holding the door in place and see how it works. It's working really well, and it's even flexible enough for the door to be folded over onto the top panel. This is really convenient for building the terrarium and maintenance. When closed, there's no gaps whatsoever, and it actually stays closed really well. I've been making these hinged silicone doors for a good while now, and the most common question I get is about the strength of the silicone. To some people's surprise, the silicone is actually extremely strong, and in this case I can hold the entire weight of the tank just by the door. To further show its strength, I'm pulling on the glass door and you can actually see the top panel of glass bending. Considering the glass door is extremely light, I'm not worried about the silicone failing whatsoever. With the door complete, all that's left to do now is to finish up the tank by cleaning up the imperfections. I'm just using a sharp blade to cut off the excess silicone. Here's the tank fully complete. It's only cost me about £10 to make and I'm really happy with it. Before building, there's a couple more things that need to be done. I'm attaching a foam mat to the bottom to protect the glass against uneven surfaces, and then I'm going to do a quick water test. I've said this in previous videos, but I'll say it again. Water testing the tank is essential, as the last thing you want is to find a leak once the build is fully complete. I've left it for over a day and there's no leaks, so it's finally time to start building the terrarium. To start off, it's going to need a drainage layer. For this build, I think the perfect material to use is going to be some coarse filter foam. I'm placing it under the tank and then using a sharp blade to trace around it. Now I can clearly see the lines. I'm going to go ahead and use some scissors to cut it out. It fits nice and snug inside the tank. In a tank like this, a filter foam drainage layer is perfect, as it's extremely light and it will also allow water to freely pass through it. Now let me quickly tell you about my plan for this build. I want to make a slow trickling stream that flows down all the way from the right side of the tank into a pond on the left side. I'm going to start off by making, and for that I'm going to use this smoothie cup lid. It really does look quite ridiculous at the moment, but fingers crossed my plan will work out. With a sharp blade, I'm cutting a hole out for the pond to sit into. This really doesn't have to be neat whatsoever. I'm continuing to take more foam out until I'm happy with how it sits. This here should be about right. You probably noticed that it is sticking out quite a lot, and that's because I have got to account for the substrate as well. With some scissors, I'm cutting out a small slot, which is where the stream will enter the pond. Now let's get to work making the pond look a little bit more natural. To start off, I'm going to use some sandpaper to roughen up the smooth surface of the plastic. The reason I'm doing this is that I'm going to cover the entire inside of the cup in silicone, and this will help it stick much better. Obviously, the massive hole in the bottom needs to be covered up. I'm placing in a few patches of tape to cover up the hole. The tape is only acting as a bridge for the silicone that I'm going to use to seal everything. I've got some black aquarium silicone as well as some crushed lava rock. I've got some larger pieces as well as some really fine dust. I'm applying the silicone in small patches and then using my finger to spread it out. I'm then taking the larger pieces of lava rock, sprinkling them inside, followed by the fine dust. All I've got to do now is press it down into the silicone and pour off the excess. It covers up the plastic really well and looks much more natural. I'm going to continue the same process until the entire inside of the cup is complete. Here it is with everything covered and dried after 24 hours. You will also notice that I have added another layer of silicone on the bottom to sandwich in the hole so there's no leaks. Now let's get to work making the stream that flows into the pond. I've got some leftover pieces of filter foam which I'm going to use to build some height. As you see, they gradually get shorter and shorter as they make their way to the pond. To To make the stream, what I'm going to use is some expanding foam. Before applying the foam, I'm going to place in some cling film on the inside of the tank. This will stop the expanding foam sticking to the filter foam, and it will mean I can remove it once it's dry. Now I'm applying the foam in the shape that I want the stream. I'm trying not to use too much as I know how much it can expand. After leaving it for a good few hours, it's pretty much fully dry. I can now get rid of the cling film and start carving the foam down. One thing I'm going to do before carving down the foam is use a Sharpie to make a rough guide of the shape of the stream. It hasn't got to be neat whatsoever, but it will give me a rough guideline to follow. Some time has passed and I've pretty much got the stream fully carved down. It really does look quite ridiculous at the moment, but trust me, it should start taking shape soon. Some parts are really quite fragile and flimsy, so I'm using some wooden toothpicks to add some support. When placing it in the tank, you can see the natural slope the water will flow down into the pond. As I'm sure you can see, there's plenty of holes that need to be patched up, so I'm going to start doing that now. I'm placing in a small piece of tissue and then pressing it down into place. Next, I'm going to soak it in some liquid type superglue. The tissue absorbs the glue and dries rock solid in no time at all. Once dried, the glue is inert, making it 100% safe for terrariums. Next, I'm going to patch up this larger hole at the bottom of the stream. I'm using the exact same method as I previously did. The glue and tissue can sometimes cause a reaction, so make sure you're doing it in a well ventilated place or wearing a mask. Now all the large holes have been patched up, it's time to start making the stream look more natural. I'm going to do this with the same method that I've done for the pond, using some black silicone and crushed lava rock. I'm applying the silicone in a small area and then using my finger to spread it out and try and get it in all the gaps and cracks. Then all I've got to do is sprinkle on some crushed lava rock, press it down into place and remove the excess. Now I'm going to repeat the same process until the entire stream is covered. Here's the stream fully covered and left to dry for 24 hours. I'm really liking how it looks and the tank is finally starting to take shape. What I'm going to do now is work on installing the pump. This is a small USB aquarium pump that has an adjustable flow. I want it to sit right in the corner. I'm pulling out the filter foam drainage and cutting a small section where the pump can sit in. I'm also placing in a small piece for it to sit on top of. Now let's work on the output that leads to the top of the stream. I've got a small section of 6mm tubing that fits nicely inside the pump. Next, I'm going to place on this 90-degree push fitting. I'm then cutting a slit down the foam for it all to sit into. After placing the stream back in, I've measured and cut another piece of 6mm tube into the correct height. I can then connect it to the push fitting and it should be complete. The only way to find out if it works properly is to give it a test run. It's flowing well, but definitely a bit stronger than I would like. My vision was to have a slow moving, trickling stream and not a fast flowing one, so I'm going to try and fix that now. After a lot of trial and error, I've finally managed to get it flowing just right. As you can see, there's really not much water coming out at all, but I think it works for this terrarium really well. The only way I got this to work properly was by adding a T-push fitting. The majority of the water continues straight back into the drainage with a small amount going up towards the stream. The next thing I need to do is actually join the pond to the stream. I'm placing a small piece of tissue between the two and then soaking it in superglue. It locks the stream and pond together really well and can easily be hidden with some more crushed lava rock. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is the purpose of this small hole here. This is where water would drain from the pond to make sure that it doesn't overflow. Now let's finally start installing everything for the final time. I'm feeding the USB cable through the gap I left at the top of the tank. Now I'm taking some filter foam and covering up the pump. This will stop things like substrate from getting down to the intake. I'm now reinstalling the pond and stream and placing in some more filter foam to act as supports. Now it's time for the substrate. For this build, I'm going to use some aqua soil. It contains a good amount of nutrients and has no problem with water constantly running through it. Regular terrarium substrate won't be suitable for this build as it's going to be extremely saturated, which it simply doesn't do well with. After pouring in a decent amount, I've spread it out and given it a light spray down. The output of the pump really doesn't look too good, so I'm going to cover that up before moving on. This is easy enough to do by gluing on some small pieces of lava rock. Now the output's covered up, I'm going to add a couple pieces of spiderwood to make the hardscape look a bit more natural. I'm experimenting with their position before locking them down in place. Now I'm happy, I'm using the super glue and tissue to attach it to the rocks. You don't have to glue the wood down, but I do find it makes planting and maintenance much easier as you haven't got to worry about knocking the hardscape over. I'm really happy with the final hardscape, but it's about to get even better as it's time for the plants. This is an aquatic fern that I've never used before, but I've heard that it does do well in terrarium conditions. After removing all the rock wool, I'm going ahead and planting it inside the tank. When I say planting, it's more wedging it in gaps, as this plant is an epiphyte and it will rot if you plant it in the substrate. Next up, I've got some hygrophila. I really like this plant and I think it will bring a nice jungle feel to the tank. I'm chopping the stems in half so I have double the amount of plants to use. The top half will grow new roots in no time and the bottom half already has a new shoot coming through. This is an easy way to get more plants than what you paid for. With most of the stems cut in half, I'm using some long tweezers to plant them down into the substrate. It's really important not to let the plants dry out, so I'm giving them a light spray down every now and then. Next up, I've got this Anubias, which has some stunning arrow-shaped leaves. I was originally going to plant it on the right side, but I think it looks much better over here on the left. I'm using a small amount of gel-type glue to mount it to the spiderwood. Even with just these plants in, the terrarium's already sprung to life. In this gap where the stream flows round, I want there to be a nice pop of colour. I think this Alternanthera mini is the perfect choice. It's a bit browny green at the moment, but once it establishes, it'll be a nice vibrant red. I've washed off the nutrient-rich gel and now I'm planting it down into the substrate. This here is some Monte Carlo and I want it to create a lush green carpet throughout the terrarium. I've once again washed out the nutrient-rich gel and I'm now splitting it up into smaller pieces. I can now start planting it into the aquasol. With time it will grow and spread and all the gaps should fill in nicely. To add some more contrast in the planting, I've got some small crypts and some Anubias and Bucephalandra. I'm mainly planting them in areas that I want to bring a little bit more detail to. With the planting almost complete, I'm going to add a couple patches of Christmas moss here and there. I'm really liking how this tank's looking after the planting, so let's get it filled up with water and turn on the stream. It's amazing to finally see the water trickling down the stream and slowly filling up the pond. I'm using some tubing to siphon out the water along with all the aqua soil I spilt in the pond. Now it's filled back up, I'm going to add some floating plants. I absolutely love the miniature scale they bring to the pond and the rest of the tank. Now it's time to add some springtails. These tiny bugs will eat things like mould and decaying matter throughout the terrarium. They're even more important in a tank like this as I used a good amount of spiderwood, which is always prone to growing mould in the first few weeks. With the tank complete, all that's left to do now is to let everything grow in and establish. Two months have passed and it's really quite amazing how well this terrarium is doing. All the plants have grown in and established really well and there's been little to no die-off whatsoever. My favourite has got to be this Monte Carlo, which has grown into a big soft cushion. You can also get a glimpse of the healthy root system that it sent out. Another plant that is doing really well is the Alternanthera mini. It's gone from this to this in just 8 weeks and it's really added that pop of colour that I was looking for. The stream is still flowing perfectly and I often find myself watching it slowly trickling down through all the plants. As we get to the pond, it's still functioning just as I hoped it would, and the Monte Carlo makes it look even more natural with it growing around the edge. The floating plants do grow relatively fast, so I do have to remove them every now and then, but this is easy enough done with a fork. Another worthwhile mention is this new Anubias leaf, which is absolutely stunning. The plants in the background have still got some growing to do, but until then I'm going to sit back and enjoy watching the stream trickle down through the scape into the pond. If you enjoyed this video, you're probably going to enjoy this one where I make a flowing waterfall paludarium.